You're listening to South Pod, Rise of a Region, hosted by Stanfield Gray and John Yarian.
Mark, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Before we get into your distinguished career and all your interesting achievements, I thought we might take just a second and look over your Southern bona fides. Now, you're not actually from anywhere in the South, is that correct?
I'm not. Quite the opposite. I'm a northerner, New York, of all places.
He said nervously. It's okay. You don't have to qualify. It's okay. And
I got here as fast as I could, as they say.
Well, yeah, that was my question. What's your Southern trajectory? When did you start living and working in places that we would think are South?
Yeah, so I spent some time in the military, and which was all Southern-based, and then lived in New Orleans for almost 10 years. Which was wonderful. And then post-Katrina, as a result of Katrina, found myself in Charleston.
Military bases across the South is an interesting part of the South.
Yes.
So that when you say that's a direct reference to some interesting locations and communities I'm aware of. Any you'd care to reveal or skip past it?
They're worth skipping. But
you're saying that's not the best of the South that it has to offer necessarily, those communities?
Yeah. Fayetteville, Columbia, Georgia.
Yeah, sure.
So real hot spots.
So you've been here for a while, though.
Yes.
You're fully indoctrinated. And
Yes.
I wonder, are there things about your life now that you recognize are kind of Southern influence? Maybe the way you eat, have you picked up words or phrases? Or are you immune? You're rooted in your Northern upbringing?
Not rooted in my Northern upbringing. I think you all gets dropped quite a bit in the house. Certainly our choice of restaurants and food is heavily weighted towards the South.
All right.
For good reason.
And you have kids?
Yes.
Are they Southern? Have you sort of done a thing here, maybe accidentally, maybe on purpose, where you look at your kid and go, you go, oh wow.
I always look back and laugh that I have 3 girls that are born in Charleston, South Carolina. I would never have said that growing up in New York, right outside the city.
Yeah, so they're truly Southern. Do they have a little accent, or is it pretty much?
One has an accent, but it's not Southern. We can't quite place it.
Okay.
But we're hoping she grows out of it.
That raises a host of other questions that I'll set aside, but that's fun. Well, good. So having gotten that out of the way, tell us a little bit about what you're up to now, and then we'll work backwards and learn about what got you in the position you are today.
Sure. So currently CEO of a company called Atlatl Software, fortunately headquartered here in Charleston, South Carolina. And we're focused on the manufacturing tech space, and we create a immersive visual and AR-driven sales experience through our software.
And that's not what initially brought you to Charleston, though.
It is. No.
So to walk us backwards, give us a little bit of the timeline, and then we'll pepper you with details about some of these great experiences.
Yeah. So it was interesting, forced up here a little bit through Hurricane Katrina. But I was working for a big company, big global technology consulting company at the time, and that's what brought me here. And was on planes most of the time, and really, living a big company executive at the time life. And not really thrilled about it. And I never, although I was a big company guy for quite a while, never really sat well with me. I always thought there was something that would be more fitting for my style of work and kind of my relaxed attitude towards things. So got a crazy offer to join a startup, which not only the offer, but most people thought I was crazy for joining this startup, small startup at the time. And that really started things for me in growing startups.
So you were at Deloitte, and then you went directly to Spark from there?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Spark Edge did work with military contractors as well as consumer products.
Yes.
And did you feel like there was a big cultural shift for you going from working and being a captain in the Army and then working at a company that was voted best culture, best place to work in South Carolina as a startup. How, can you share with our listeners a little bit of that dynamic? Was it different? Was it more similar than you might think? Or were there processes in place that John and I were discussing this earlier, that maybe sometimes people who work at startups don't have the same kind of systematic way of viewing something, or they're not as process oriented as you might be in the military with a more rigid hierarchy.
Right. And so, certainly the military, transitioning from the military to Deloitte is pretty easy. It's a very structured place to work, as you can imagine. Suit and tie, highly processed, very structured workday, very structured environment. So going from that to a startup was dramatically different. From no suits to, when I got to Spark, no processes. So, and we evolved because we had to. So we evolved some of the processes, but it was dramatically different, as I think, moving from big company to a startup always will be, or should be.
Mm-hmm. But that's what you were looking for. I mean, you made a reference earlier about not fitting or feeling comfortable in an executive role. I mean, maybe there was a problem with the suit and some of the restraints.
Absolutely.
Is that what?
Yes.
Tell us about that. What's the problem there?
I think a lot of people feel this way, and as they end up at startups, they realize that's where they should be. Some people continue to do that, startup after startup, because they're looking for. I think for me, it was more fundamental. Is you really have a direct hand at building something at a startup, and you take away the processes, the suits, the kind of elements of work. The icons of work. For me, it was, do I have a hand directly at building something? And it's no matter what level you're at a big company, it's very hard to say you have a direct hand in really creating and building something. And I think fundamentally, that's the bug that a lot of people get for startups, and you are creating something and building something.
As you were creating and building that here in Charleston, other companies like Blackbaud, Benefit Focus, Boomtown were established and beginning to have success. Did you feel the rise of a community here, or was it more, we're all doing some neat things on the periphery, I hear some things are happening? I mean, what was that experience like for you with other peers and colleagues specific to Charleston?
Well, I think the past 10 years and the ability to see two public companies emerge out of Charleston has helped us tremendously. We need more of them, but those two, from a talent perspective, have had a huge impact. But growing kind of the fundamental roots of the technology community, you have to look to BF and Blackbaud. I think the biggest impact it has and will continue to have is on talent. Mm-hmm. And when I first got here, if you were a software developer or an engineer or anyone deeply in the tech community, you were coming here for a job with Blackbaud or Benefit Focus, and you probably had to stay there to have a career or leave. That's not the case now, and that hasn't been the case for a couple of years. Is you can come for a job anywhere, you can go to one of those companies, you can go back to a startup. So at any level, all the way through executive, you really have a home here in Charleston. And I don't think we could say that as a community 5 or 10 years ago. So that's positive progress. And I was on the receiving end of feeling that. As we scaled Spark, dramatically scaled that company, I was able to bring that talent in.
So when the talent arrives, the job is interesting, the work's going to be challenging. Is quality of life still the closer that lands them?
I think it helps. So we're living in a community that the quality of life and the cost of living is attractive. Certainly, if you're coming out of New York, Boston, or California. I think what lands engineers and a lot of software-focused talent is the work. Is if you can present, and we're fortunate to be solving and addressing big tech problems at Atlatl, you can hire engineers at all talent levels if you're presenting them with really hard tech challenges. And yeah, I believe, because I've been on the end of this, if you present that, that's the closer for engineers. I think it is above money for engineers. Are you going to present me with a real hard tech challenge that I'm going to feel rewarded?
Let's dive into the product for a second. Augmented reality. I mean, it's obviously something that was very important to Atlatl, and we are here surrounded by advanced manufacturing. You know, Boeing, Volvo arriving, BMW, others. What do you see as the future of augmented reality for manufacturing and for customer acquisition and other applications?
I think we're early. We're a little bit early. I think we're not as early as I thought we were a year ago when we first developed this augmented reality product. I thought we had a little more
Speaking
time.
of Atlatl, we're early.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're early in seeing the mass adoption of AR.
Okay.
I think the mind shift, the comfort level of immersing yourself in AR isn't quite mainstream yet. But I think, you know, products like Apple AR, having AR apps on the new iPhone is dramatically shifting the mind shift rapidly. So once people get comfortable operating in that environment, it's going to follow into business, and you know it's going to have massive applications in training, in servicing big manufacturing. And we're making a bet that it's going to have a huge impact on the buying and selling of complex manufacturing products. And everyone's going to be operating in an AR environment in the future.
Can we quickly pause and talk about how much fun it is to say the name of the company, Atlatl? And for listeners who feel like we're maybe all belching or mispronouncing something, it's Atlatl.
Yes.
We're saying it correct. It's ATL. So just everybody who's listening, let that sink in for a second. I love it. I think it's a ton of fun to say. When you first heard it, did you think that's amazing, or was it just confusing, or what's your relationship to that really innovative name of a company?
I had my own challenges with it, only because if you don't get it, it becomes, and I've seen it on the other end with customers. If you don't immediately get it, it becomes a challenge for customers. So, you know, I was worried when I first got there that we would have a branding challenge with the name. It's proved out to be not that dramatic. You know, we did a huge shift in our logo, our digital presence, and the name has become, you know, less of a challenge.
I think it's a ton of fun. It's actually,
once you get it, you get it. But if you don't get it right off, we've heard a number of different pronunciations that aren't even close.
And I'm going to challenge you to clearly define what that is in a moment. But as you prepare yourself, it has turned some of us into sort of unintentional, inadvertent brand advocates. Because I've heard some people mispronounce it, and I correct them, and then realized, wait, I'm turning into like a walking advertisement for this company that doesn't even know what I'm doing, and now I'm out here helping people.
Please continue.
What
with
yeah,
that.
no,
we need advocates all over the place.
For fun and trivia, what is an Atlatl?
So it goes back to Aztecs. They were accelerating the speed and distance in which they can throw a spear with a device called an Atlatl. And the best way modernly to get context is if you go to a dog park and you see someone with a long plastic whip-like function with a ball on the end, that is a modern version of an Atlatl.
Mark, I think that's the first empirically provable fact anybody has uttered on Southpod. I want to give you credit for that. That's real and true, and we should celebrate that moment. If I had a bell, I'd ding it. But thank you for that.
Well, break it down for the listeners. What's the company size, your head count? You know, where do you fit into the industry within the region, nationally?
So we're 43 people. And we're a product company, so you know the business model. It's a traditional SaaS business model. So we're not attempting to build a huge headcount. We're growing through our SaaS revenue. You know, we are on the edge of moving towards a national brand. We're competing and entering into a space with AR and 3D that's really not crowded right now. And because of that, we've gotten a lot of partnership attention, channel partners attention, and had a real fantastic close to 2017. That is indications of pretty big growth.
Has the industry analyst community sniffed around a little bit? I mean, I know folks are trying to get more data and come to understand the wave you described earlier, whether it's rising on the consumer side, it's starting to penetrate businesses, this comfortability with the technology. Have you had much engagement with those folks, or are they kind of following somewhere behind trying to make sense of it?
We've been really deliberate in the past year of engaging the analyst community. I think I've learned that it's a major element of your success is to engage with the analyst community really actively, and on the receiving end, they want to be engaged by companies like us. They want to understand well ahead of time what companies like us are doing, because it makes their job easier, and they get ahead of potential trends that are coming out. So we've been very active, very deliberate with the analyst community. The analyst community itself is shifting a little bit towards digital as well. The more kind of iconic stoic brands, are growing into a different facet. We are a huge fan of a company called G2 Crowd. And, it's my belief that that's where analysts, crowdsourcing reviews is, they're doing it for software, other people are doing it for restaurants, other people are doing it for consumer goods.
Yeah.
But, that idea of crowdsourcing reviews on software, I think they're in the right space, and we're spending a lot of time on that partnership.
Well, it's something we've witnessed in industry analysis and in the media, frankly, is this illusion that you can keep up with it, that there's going to be some expert or critic who's on top of this on an ongoing basis, which is frankly impossible. And what I've seen both in the analysis and the media worlds is creating sort of separate departments or other modes of tracking AR, VR, and AI is another big one, outside of vertical categories, but just as their own kind of endeavor. And it's led a lot of companies to what you just said, which is preference for almost a crowdsourced, more of a wave reaction to what they're doing, instead of some guru who pronounces one technology good and another one bad.
Right.
Yeah. That was just my own statement there, Mark. That wasn't even really a question. Listeners were all nodding in agreement to the statement I made. It's good radio.
So let's do a quick segment we call Now, Near Future, or Never. So the idea of being augmented reality, virtual reality, full immersion, mixed reality, partial immersion, are these things that every consumer is eventually going to adopt, and just their reality will blend with everything? Or is it always going to feel somewhat like it's somewhat remote, it's a console, something I do for fun as a hobby? Or will it become so embedded and integrated in our reality that we almost can't distinguish the difference?
Yes, future. We as consumers and social will all be really heavily embedded in some form of MR, VR, or mixed reality.
Okay, and having said that, is that how much of your role in leadership of this company is evangelizing that particular viewpoint versus simply educating qualified audiences? I mean, do you feel like you have a responsibility to wander the wilderness and preach the future? Or is it coming to you and it's merely a task of showing people how it might work or integrate with their systems?
So I think as CEO, out on the forward edge of being an evangelist. I'll try to stay away from that word, but on the forward edge of trying to get exposure to this. I think our salespeople have to be a little more pragmatic and tactical of selling what's right in front of us. I'm trying to stay ahead of and pointing to what's next, and then pointing back to us as the company that's going to be there when you're ready for it.
So what are you reading, paying attention to? Who are your mentors that guide you as you're trying to anticipate that next direction? I'm always fascinated with, is someone reading science fiction that's also informing their decisions? Are they getting up in the morning and reading Recode and trade publications, listening to podcasts? What does your intake look like?
So that's a wide-ranging, but a favorite question of mine. So I think on the technical side, it's really trade pubs, medium, recode, people that are out there, because I think AI and AR, mixed reality, VR, is still a little leading edge, that it's the people that are writing about it in these, trade-focused, tech-focused publications and writing about how they're applying it to their business. I'm just constantly looking for people that are applying these technologies to something tangible that then I can go point to and say, this is where it's going, and, we're on this. And then, on the culture side, the building a company, the other piece of this is, you're building a tech, but we're also trying to build a company, which is really important to me. And it was foundational at Spark, and I'm trying to, they gave me a really great opportunity when they asked me to come to Atlatl to build the company that I want to build. And that really excited me. And that means more than building a tech platform. It's, how do you build a great culture and a great company? So when we're 2,000 people, we have the foundation of a great company. So I read a lot on that, and there's some great things out there. I'm reading right now, the former head of talent at Netflix just put out a book, just came out a couple weeks ago, about how they created a culture of freedom at Netflix, and it's incredible. And one of the tenets of a startup is how much lack of policy and freedom can you give people and watch them operate with that freedom. And I just love that topic, and I'm fascinated by how I can apply it to the culture.
Is that something you calibrate daily, weekly, quarterly? How hands-on are you with that? And is there a Southern quality to that? Back to our opening with the show, we're very focused on, is there still an identifiable aspect to building a culture here that might be different than New York?
Yes. I think there's a quality of life aspect that weaves itself through people in the South, and we want to create a nice work-life balance. And I think that's a little bit different. You can absolutely balance a great work-life balance, enjoy everything this community has to offer, and still get meaningful work done and build a significant company. I think you need to be deliberate about it, but that's the challenge, and that's what we're trying to address.
I want to come back to culture in a second, but real quickly, you said you're 43 right now?
Age?
Head count? No, head count.
Yes.
We can do age. You want to do ages?
43 and, yes, 43.
Okay. And so that's small enough. You probably have a sense of this. Do you have anybody that's actually from here? We're recording in sunny Charleston, South Carolina, or is the company largely transplants moved here, grew up elsewhere?
I think we have probably half are from here.
Really?
From here in some capacity.
Really?
Went to school, USC or Clemson, and have just stayed.
Huh. That's a really interesting
And I think
statistic.
that's trending differently than it was 5 years ago, where you're getting people from all over the place.
Yeah.
And we're recruiting people from all over the place.
Yeah, that's really cool. And if you want to share your age, you can, but you don't have to. What I was going to ask about culture was, could you share a tangible example with us? I'm always curious about this because we talk a lot about aspects of culture, but we rarely get into the specifics. And I don't know if there's a policy or a habit or anything you could offer from Spark or Atlatl that you perceive to be a part of that culture you're intentionally trying to create. Something that has people do a thing or free to do something else that would help.
I think the most tangible example for discussion is time off. And it took me some adjusting to thinking about, unlimited time off or no time off because there's no policy. Take off when you want. And over the course of two companies, selling a company to a Fortune 500 company and having to explain to that Fortune 500 company how this works, which is an interesting story in itself. But seeing how that plays out when you give largely adults the freedom to take off when they want, there's a tremendous corporate aspect to that and a benefit, and then watch the way they operate. And what I found over the course of 2 companies and needing the data to support it is, for the most part, people take generally the same time off they would have taken if you gave them it anyway, but they feel empowered and they feel the freedom. And the people, the 10%ers or 1%ers that take more than they should, they're getting addressed through other means. And so, when we sold Spark, we had to do the analysis, and over the course of 350 people and 2 years of being able to track it, I was able to present, what's your time off policy? Well, we give people 21 days off. Well, here's generally our people, 90% of them are right in that curve of 21 days off. So, I think that's a real tangible example of something that if you give people these freedoms and you hire adults and they want to work at your company because you're doing something cool and they see they want to make it great too, they're going to operate within the same way. I think, beer in the office is a little bit more of a touchy subject, but what I found is if you offer that over the course of, again, 2 companies, you generally have no problems. And people move towards treating things like a privilege rather than a policy. And when they treat it like a privilege, they respect the environment and they respect, how you're supposed to operate.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, though, because I find that in companies that have thoughtful planning and processes about their work production and execution, when they truly get it on a conveyor belt and people understand expectations and behave with integrity around projects, it works great. The time off, the beer in the office works great. I've been in any number of startup environments, Stan has too, and you have as well. They've got all the beer. In theory, you can take time off, and there's this really oppressive expectation, right? It feels like this big trap that's designed to keep people in the office 70, 80 hours a week. I think the combination is the trick, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on that as well. So there's the policies you just described, but then there's the execution of the work itself, and that's either cleaned up and planned out or it's a disaster. What are some lessons you've learned about scheduling, executing work, assigning teams, and creating hierarchy?
So I like a very flat organization. I think the flatter you can get an organization, the better off you are in executing tasks. I think none of this can replace hiring good people and creating very clear expectations, goals, and translate that, for our what we do is down to stories and lines of code, and setting the expectations clearly on what needs to get done. Those expectations and really knowing, a clear roadmap, technical roadmap on what we're going to get done and when, set the tone for things like time off, because then, down to that individual developer knows what he's responsible for. If he knows what he's responsible for, he knows what time off he can ask and reasonably take, or he's going to let someone down or miss a project. So, I think the reason why these work in good environments is the people know what they need to get done. And if they get it done, they know they can take time off.
Yeah, it's simple to say, and it's interesting. They know what they need to get done. I think that's so huge. And a lot of companies, people genuinely do not know what they need to get done. They feel like they need to be in some sort of perpetual state of readiness to do it, or just acting busy all the time.
Yep.
And to me, those are just big indicators. They don't really know what they need to get. They don't know when they're done. They don't know what done looks like. And when people do, they can take vacation with confidence, own the choice, and then come back really excited, and sometimes a day early, because they're done. They took their time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Let's cut to another segment real quick we call utopia or dystopia. So the idea behind this is, do you feel more like you'd like to live on the Jetsons, or that Blade Runner is on the way? The Terminator will soon arrive. As a technologist who's probably feel like you're inventing the future, you're embracing technologies, how do we avoid these things? And I don't want to answer the question for you, but we'll just start. We'll start with utopia versus dystopia. Where are we
Should I
headed?
just hum the theme from
Maybe we
Blade
should hum it.
Runner? Okay.
Yeah. Where are we headed? What do you think, Mark?
So absent of the political environment, I think we're probably headed more towards Jetsons than Blade Runner.
Very good. So, in light of the current political environment and the big four and, the frightening four or whatever you want to call, those companies, how can we prevent the dystopia? What are some things that work? Let's take it back to a very tangible example, within your company that kind of keep people optimistic about what they're doing.
At our company level,
Sure.
So I won't try to solve a larger issue.
If you can, please do
for
solve
the tech
a larger.
community here.
Yeah, we'd
But
like that too.
So I've been guilty of being a broker of hope amongst the company. But I think for a CEO, that's part of your role. You have to be a broker of hope, and so I think giving people the idea of how big we can be. And the trajectory we're going to see. I very much believe that's part of my role, is to keep them going to what our end goals are, and not hope that's not founded in anything, but we are in a place right now, and I felt the same place at Spark when we were going through a massive scale. Is we are up against a very, very difficult 6 months. We just closed a bunch of deals, and we're starting to feel it. So getting people hopeful about what the back end of that 6 months looks like, as you're asking them to at some point work significantly more than the 40 hours. They need to see what the hope on the other end of it that is, and I feel strongly that that's part of my role.
Is there a tipping point where you grow it to and this is obviously hypothetical and theoretical, but where you grow something to a point where you get that feeling again that you need to get into something smaller that's more hands-on? I mean, where's that line where you drift away from knowing that you're really a part of building something and it's gotten...
Right. I think you will see people that are just...
Atlatl listeners are leaning in now to figure out...
I've seen the serial, like, this is too big we went through this at Spark when we were doubling in size every year. And there were a handful of people that said, I loved it when we were 70 people. I got to get back there. And, when this place is changing, it was great when we were all together in one room and there was only, 70, 75 of us. And, at that point, this place isn't for you anymore, because we're growing this company and we're growing it fast. For me, when we sold to a big company, I knew I wasn't long for that.
Yeah.
That, unless it was my own big company, which
Right.
Atlatl will be at some point a company that is going to be very large, and I will be happy to be there.
So there's a right way to
large.
do big. It's not just big for its own sake. If you were able to stay true to what you believe in,
Yes.
there's not a limit on the growth. There's not a moment you go, oh God, there's 2,000 people here, I got to get out.
No.
Yeah.
Big gets harder and harder. Culture on scale gets hard. And keeping culture on scale, I think, is the hardest thing. There's countless podcasts and books written on culture on scale, and I lived it in somewhat of a micro sense at Spark, but that gets difficult. At some point, the processes you never wanted to write become required and needed, and but you got to find the balance. So I think that is something that is a really interesting challenge to take on, and very difficult to do right.
So in your role, you're obviously always thinking a couple of years ahead. You're future-minded. We spoke to it earlier. I'm curious, what's your sense of what one of your team members, somebody at Atlatl today who works there, where do they think they work? How would they describe what the company does to a parent or a friend?
I think creating a visual 3D sales acceleration platform at a core is what we do. I think the engineers at the junior to mid level are saying they're solving very, very challenging engineering problems as it relates to immersive 3D and AR. And I think that's largely 70% of those 43 people are engineers, and that's what those guys are focused on.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, among the engineers, how important is it in your mind for them to have a pedigree like Stanford or MIT, Georgia Tech, or are many of them almost self-taught in the sense that they were driven to learn and understand the technology at a young age, and they continue their education? But in other words, nature versus nurture. I mean, how much can they be sculpted if they're not just driven passionately by it individually?
So I think degree of pedigree I'll set aside for a minute, but I've seen both the completely self-taught coder and the we'll call it classically trained coder. And I think you can absolutely be a very, very talented, productive software engineer, self-trained. I think it comes with a bunch of limitations for how you impact a company if you don't have a classical education around software engineering. There's just so much more that goes into the job than just sitting down and writing code. And there's plenty of jobs to just sit down and write code. But as we talk about really deep back-end work, highly technical things like AR, and then growing into leadership positions, can you not only write code, but can you lead a couple guys that are writing code and mentor them and make sure they're getting the best technical competency mentoring? And I think that can only be found in an actual degreed type software program.
How do you guys think about equity and diversity in engineering? I mean, what's that like for you as you think about team and culture and who you want to see in a room and how you want to grow? Is that a very intentional and policy-driven approach, or is it sort of organic and we're looking for talent and we get who we get?
So I think it has to be, I'll stay away from policy, but it has to be super deliberate.
Yeah.
The way we work, and I think a lot of software shops work, is highly collaborative. Particularly if you're working in kind of an agile environment. So I've seen it on scale. Is you need diversity in those groups to really get the best product. People are thinking differently, and mixing up the diversity of those groups creates a better work environment. I think people challenge each other better. I went on a deliberate campaign at Spark to hire female engineers because we were going from 100 to 300, and I started seeing the track record of just hiring. And I talked to my head of HR and said, if we keep this up, we were going to have 300 guys that look exactly the same.
Be a programmer shop,
and it's just not.
Yeah.
But to do that, we had to deliberately say we're going to go hire female engineers.
Yeah.
And it had to be that thought out to go find that. And that it probably goes on scale for minority groups and everything. Yeah. And at some point that might not be the case for me at that point, and I think for now it's got to be the case.
Yeah.
And you really have to think about what those groups look like, what the benefits of putting together diverse groups, believe in it, and then go set some time to be deliberate about it.
And I don't know if I've heard conflicting accounts if that's harder in the South to be mindful in the engineering space and with women and people of color and creating equity and diversity in that team. Some would suggest, it's an extra challenge in the South. Others have suggested to me, no, it's not. And it could be just as hard in Chicago or New York or anywhere else.
Is the pipeline different?
I think it's a top of the funnel volume play in this community. is the top of the funnel just isn't large enough
Yep.
to not make it a challenge.
Yeah.
That did good for radio.
Yeah, Mark's waving his hand around the studio at as good a way as any to. Yeah.
Great. So let's dive into that. What does deal flow look like here? How do you approach that? And do you initially begin with angel groups? Do you, at your level, having scaled a company, are you going directly to VCs you have established relationships with?
Right now, that's the process. I've been, as we enter into that, and we've been fortunate to just starting that process is, what I've created, a group of networks and, people that care about the tech we're doing, which I think is really important. And, trying to find a connection to either sometimes to Charleston or to the South or to the actual, the work we're doing.
Have you noticed people are more open to it now? More VCs are looking for deals specific to the region?
I think I've shared this story with you before. Is 5 years ago when we were doing this, the California-based VC firms they thought that was an obstacle. Charleston was an obstacle for them. Now I've heard it twice from a California-based firm. It's a mandate. Not to look in Charleston, but to look outside of California for deals. So we're starting to see this really interesting shift from too hard to do because it's really far away and there's no way you can scale a company in Charleston, South Carolina. Heard that. To we're looking for deals in the South. And not only that, we have an LP mandate to look for deals, in this area. That, really struck me as a sign of growth. And, I think a couple things. Economics of building a business in a community like this certainly compared to California, are great. Your two biggest cost drivers, people and buildings, are significantly less expensive. So when I take money from a VC firm, I can do more with it in this community, and that's resonating with them. And the talent has proved out to be here. And I think, that was the other holdup and obstacle we used to have is there enough software talent in these communities to really scale a company? And
so as
we've
you've seen
proved that out.
As you've seen that ecosystem evolve, are we more likely at this point to attract a company that relocates to Charleston and scales, or the homegrown approach, where a founder is spinning out of another company, able to raise money now and scale? On balance, what are you seeing?
We're going to have more homegrown success, and I think we should want it that way. I would love companies to get parachuted in here and build out. It'll do nothing but great things for. I think the growing your own companies is a longer path, but this is going to take time. I think what puts a area on the map is not a bunch of startups. It's a bunch of startups that grew into sustainable, valuable companies. We do that a couple times more. The money will come.
So if you
build a sustainable, valuable company, money will come.
So on your wish list to help grow that, that environment, would it be more support in terms of economic development from the state or the county? Would it look like Techstars or Y Combinator locates here? What are the ingredients that you think we're missing? If you could say, I want A, B, and C in the next 5 years, and we will take off.
I think certainly, things like Dig South and other events get the right kind of social buzz and attraction to what's going on down here. I think, addressing the extension to real software education, programs. I think what we're doing with Clemson up in North Charleston is a start of those type of things. But when you look at really big tech communities, they have really big, R&D type universities. So we need to make a more deliberate attempt to market that, to brand it, and make sure that there's a deep connection between the education facilities, and the software community. And I don't think we've done that enough with what we have to offer, because we need to see that. Investors are going to need to see that. I think it just access to buildings and really tough stuff that's hard to solve. Parking.
Right.
It gets into things that seem a little bit boring, but you want to put a great software company in downtown Charleston. You know how hard that is to do these days. So I think you need to make sure that the things like facilities and access to talent those elements are all addressed. And that's not an individual company issue. We should be talking about it as a community. And I think we are, more and more.
We actually end every South Pod with a deep dive conversation on transportation infrastructure. And we cap it off. I read a traffic study word for word. It's how we end every pod. So.
Right. And I'm ready to tear down all the garages and adopt autonomous vehicles anyway, where they're just not necessary.
Yeah.
Oh, this has been great. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mark. John, any parting words?
I love the name, Atlatl. Everybody listening, practice. It's fun. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for listening to South Pod, Rise of a Region, where innovators dish on success, failure, and a rapidly evolving South.